Hello, everybody, and welcome or welcome back to the second shelf and to a non-fiction kind of sort of video. So not your recent reads on Sunday, but we're now on the 12th, so it's middle of Nonfiction November. How is it going? Are you reading nonfiction? And I thought I'm gonna make a video about how to get into nonfiction if you are a really hardcore fiction reader normally, because fiction can be a way to get into nonfiction. And I thought, pairs, let's do pairs. So what I want to do is I want to show you examples of a way how you can use your fiction reads to get into nonfiction, if you so desire, of course. If you don't want to read nonfiction, skip this video. And the first two are about let's start with the first one first. I'm so excited I can't even formulate a straight sentence, because we are just out of Victober. A lot of you read Victorian literature during October, or maybe always read Victorian literature. So the classics are a really good way to get into nonfiction. How am I going to do that, you might ask? Let's take as an example, and again, these are only examples to show you what I mean, to illustrate, so to speak. So let's say Middlemarch. Take one of those favorite books of yours, the famous modern classic Virginia Woolf or George Eliot or Jane Austen, and you will see that most of those books, you're not the only one who read them, of course, and who might have made a nonfiction book out of their experience with this classic. So for the pair up a classic, you can, for instance, take Middlemarch, and then you have My Life in Middlemarch by Rebecca Mead. Rebecca Mead is a journalist, and she encountered Middlemarch when she was quite young, a young woman. And she went to Oxford, and then she moved to the US to become a journalist, and she reread Middlemarch a lot of times, and it has a special significance for her in her life, in her reading life. And she wrote a book about it. So one good way of finding an entry point, so to speak, into nonfiction is take a classic, one that you really love, and Google whether people wrote a book about their experience, for instance. And I'm not talking literary criticism. I mean, if you're into literary criticism, of course, but I'm talking about experience, people who have experienced this book and write about their experience, like Rebecca Mead did in My Life in Middlemarch. So that's one way. You just take, and the classics are, you will probably have the most success when you take a classic. Another way is through the author, more or less. And my example is Sylvia Plath's Bell Jar. I try to take books as examples that most of you will either have read or at least have heard of. So if Sylvia Plath is your thing, and maybe Bell Jar you really enjoyed, of course you can read a biography. That's the same for George Eliot. There are plenty of biographies out there for the famous authors, whether it's Sylvia Plath or Virginia Woolf or George Eliot, Jane Austen. But maybe that is not your thing. Biographies is often not the easiest way to get into nonfiction, because unfortunately, I have to say, a lot of people who write biographies just can't tell a good story. And if you want to read a really good biography, you will find that it's always one that tells a good story. It's not just throws facts and figures and dates and what have you at you. But anyway, so you can, of course, look for a biography of a favorite author. But another way is that you look for a book that takes this novel and this author, and then maybe one part of it, and writes a book about it. So my example for Sylvia Plath's Bell Jar, which is, if you're not familiar with, a highly autobiographical novel about her time as an intern with a famous fashion magazine. That really happened. She got an internship in New York, and she spent a summer there with other people, and she wrote this fictionalized account of her experiences. And the book I chose has something to do with where she lived while she worked there, and that was the Barbizon Hotel in New York. Because the magazine, the fashion magazine, had young interns coming all the time, and they would all live in this hotel exclusively for women. I mean, we're talking, 40s and 50s, where a young woman alone couldn't just rent an apartment. I mean, you can't do that now in New York either because it's too expensive. But you had this hotel, the Barbizon Hotel, where they all lived. And there's a book about it by Paulina Bren, the Barbizon New York Hotel that set women free. It's not only about Sylvia Plath. So if you're only interested in Sylvia Plath, you should look for something that focuses exclusively on her. But this takes the one of the facts of the novel, young women coming to New York, living in that hotel, and then explores the hotel. So you will find Sylvia Plath in here, but also other women who stayed at the hotel. Grace Kelly, for instance, Joan Didion stayed there. The Flappers, it starts in the 1920s when the hotel was opened. So this might be something that grabbed your interest, and you can then expand from the novel. I should try to do this. Expand this fact from the novel into a reading. The Barbizon is a really good book, by the way, if you are interested in the Bell Jar, in Sylvia Plath's experience. But you will find that a lot of times, if you're interested in a certain writer or in a certain time period, you don't have to limit yourself when you look for books, nonfiction books, to biographies. There's much, much more out there when it comes to writers who explore other authors' lives, or in this case, a certain hotel. So those are two possibilities. Another possibility is that you found a book, you read a fiction book where the subject matter really grabbed you. And as an example, I want to go for a very recent book who a lot of people read, most people have heard of, and a lot of people loved. It didn't quite work for me that well, I have to say that, but that's not the point here. The point is how you use a fiction book to get into nonfiction. And I'm talking of Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. So this is a book about one guy, Demon Copperhead, his nickname, from when he was born to a drug-addicted mother. He got into this whole opioid crisis environment. He was born in the Appalachian region. And then the book is about his life. So from his birth until his let's say early adulthood, but his young adult, when he was a young man, not a young adult, a young man. The focus point of the book, of course, of the novel, is the story of this character's life. But the background, the topic of the whole book is the opioid crisis in the US. So if you find that an interesting topic, and I'm sure you did if you read the book and liked the book, you can take that topic and look for nonfiction about it. And just in case, there is one by Beth Macy, a journalist who lived there or still lives there, and writes for a local paper. And she explored the development of the opioid crisis from the start in the 1990s up to 2017. The book was published in 2018. And yes, this is the cover of the TV series. Couldn't get any other cover. You know how much I like TV or film related covers. But so if there is a fiction book with a very specific topic that interests you, and again, I assume that it interests you if you like the book, then go look for a nonfiction book about the same topic or a related topic. For instance, I don't know, if you read historical fiction and it's about fashion, for instance, but you're not interested in fashion in, I don't know, the 19th century, but maybe you are interested in fashion in the 20th or 21st century. I'm sure there are books out there. Or food. If there's a book, a fiction book with a topic, a central topic that has something to do with food. So I'm just saying, if a novel has a certain topic that was of interest to you, it can be a good way of looking for a nonfiction book about the same topic or a related topic and try to read that. I mean, by the way, for all nonfiction, is that there are also not that good nonfiction books out there, like novels that you will not like. So it's not, if you pick up a nonfiction book, maybe you start with, going to the library because you don't want to spend money on it. And the topic of this novel, food, really grabbed you, and you read a book, nonfiction book about it, but you just don't like it. That doesn't mean that you are not liking nonfiction in general. Maybe it's just not such a good book. It happens. Another example, just as a second example for the topic thing, I picked a relatively recent book, a debut by a Canadian author, Amy Wall, We Jane, which was published, I think, maybe 2 years ago or something. Let me just check this. 2021. So this is basically a road trip of a young woman who doesn't know what to do with her life, and she pairs up with an older woman, and they drive to Newfoundland, where the young woman comes from, and where the older friend also has people she knows. The title, We Jane, refers to an abortion help organization, which is now very much needed again, I think, certainly in the US, where before Roe v. Wade, a group of women, to begin with in Chicago, they came together and they helped women who wanted a safe abortion. They had doctors who would perform these abortions, and it was a kind of an underground network. This book is kind of a new way of looking at it in the 21st century. So it has nothing to do with that older network, but it takes the name and the topic from that existing network. And if you think, oh, I want to read more about the real network, then there is, of course, a book about it. The Story of Jane, the Legendary Underground Feminist Abortion Service by Laura Kaplan, was published, I think, in the 90s. 1996. And it's just what it says on the tin. Laura Kaplan, who was also part of this underground network, just describes how the network came to be, what they did, the women who worked for the network, the women who helped other women to get a safe abortion. So if this book, for instance, or a similar book, you think that is taking, I should specify it better. If you read a fiction book that is taking some real events, I mean, the opioid crisis is a real event, but a smaller one, maybe the opioid crisis is too big for you to, want to know more about, or you're just not that interested. But if there is a book about a historical figure or an historical event or some topic that played a huge role at a certain time, like here, this network of women, then I'm sure if you do a little bit of research, you will find a book about that historical event or network or what have you. And I mean, if you read a book, I think there are lots of fictionalized books about the Kennedy assassination, of course. Then you will be, you will probably find hundreds of books. And that topic is maybe too big. But I think you will be surprised how many novels take a certain fact or a certain event and make a story around it. There are novels about, if you're into science fiction, novels about AI. And there are really good books about AI. Or there are novels about where it's an immigration issue. And there are plenty of books about that issue. So if you are a real, like I said, hardcore fiction lover, but you still would want to, and not only because it's Nonfiction November, but if you still maybe want to dip your toe in the nonfiction water, then I would think the way to do that is to try and connect it with your fiction reads, because that's probably a much more personalized way, first of all, but also it makes more sense to you, I would suggest. Anyway, this is not really a tag, but I invite all of you Nonfiction November readers, content creators, to come up with pairs, to give people suggestions about pairs, fiction books that they could pair up in one way or the other with a nonfiction read. I think that would be a great idea for a tag. Steve, weaponize it, I would say. Anyway, this was my attempt to get the real hardcore fiction readers into nonfiction. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching. And as always, I'm very much looking forward to your comments, and I'll see you all soon in the next one.